Good evening. So we'll start with the CFO report for the third quarter. The first slide, as we all know, are the revenues of January through September. The first column is the budget. The second column is the at 75% at this point of the game. Then we have the actuals. Then we have the difference between the actuals and the budget. So favorable is the positive number, unfavorable is the negative. So what we start seeing here, first and second penny have been favorable as of the end of September. Pretty much flat at 0.8%, which is good given our environment right now. Second penny and third penny are a little bit down, although they have getting better in this quarter. They're still down. Third penny about 12.9% to budget, and bid tax is about 16.1% below budget. As a total, the sales tax, it's pretty much flat at 0.3% negative, or $34,000. It is important to note that these numbers do include the settlement of $144,000. Without this settlement, we would actually be around 1.6% lower than our budget. Property tax, which is the last 1% here in the second last row, has been pretty much as expected, targeting 0.8% favorable for the year as of the end of September. So the chart on your right just shows how we've been doing year over year and versus budget. So year over year, we're down 0.4% versus at this point of time last year, and we're about 0.3% below budget. Again, this is worse than our previous year's performance, but given our current economy, I would consider that to be a positive result. Moving on to the next slide, if we look at it on a quarterly basis, the charts on, the tables on your left side have the collected and then the adjusted. So the only difference between these two is your second quarter amounts. The collected one include that $144,000 settlement, which brings the second quarter performance at about 4.3% deficit on a year-over-year basis. If we go down to the adjusted and we remove that 144% to truly understand the true economic impact of COVID in our economy, we were down 8.2%, or $300,000. Now, third quarter is a different story. Thankfully, we've been able to reverse that. So third quarter, we ended up 4% better than last year, or $157,000. The drivers were the construction, wholesale, trade, and retail industries. Now, the hospitality industry, although has shown material improvement, it was minus 20% in July, minus 5% as a whole in August, and it's plus 12% in September. And these are results from the previous month. That is important to note. So the September number is actually for activity that happened in August and so forth. So although these numbers are better and are encouraging, we would like to invite the community to continue supporting our establishments, our local establishments. We've received early October numbers from September's performance, and they are not as encouraging as what we're seeing here. If we move on to our budget, our general fund, which covers our operational activity for the city, as you know, our departments came with our own COVID budget, which was lower than the past budget because we didn't know what to expect back in March. So as a result of all our leadership team, our staff just managing to that budget and being very mindful of their expenses, we're currently sitting at a surplus of about $2.6 million to the past budget, which is about 61.7% of actual spend, again, compared to a 75%, which we should be at this point of time. The only department that it's over budget is the city attorney department, and that's for the high level of litigation activity that we had this year that wasn't planned. Other drivers of this surplus are vacancies that we've had in the city departments, as well as the closing of the recreational facilities during the summer. That said, we did kind of like save on or reduce the expense because we weren't open, but also the revenues were lower than expected for those recreational activities. If we look at the other side, our revenues right now are sitting about a 1.7 million higher than expected. This is mostly driven by the COVID CARES Act refund of expenses that we've been getting through the state program. And I have an update later on how much and how that's going as well. Any questions on the general fund performance? All right, if we move on to the CIP fund, we're currently sitting at about 24% of expense or $4.9 million surplus. This is mainly driven again by us proactively reducing the capital projects that were non-critical to make sure we weren't running at a deficit at the end of the year. That's about $1.4 million. Most of these projects will be carried forward to next year, so we'll use the surplus funds from this year to next year. We just weren't able to reactivate them this year due to timing. The other surplus is driven by our debt payments. They're due in November, so $2.2 million will be paid, and that comes out of our CIP fund as well. So on and all, our cities right now as a whole, including all the enterprise funds, at about 55% of expense or at $11 million surplus. This is a little misleading because there's a lot of end-of-year activity and accrual of expenses. But again, I think that the message here is like there are no red flags with our budget, and we're tracking to better than expected in our revenues. Any questions? So if we move on to the Swiftel Center, on the left side we have the P&L, and I think that the message here, if we look at the third column, right now the Swiftel Center is performing at $134,000 better than the original budget. They did were reducing their budget, and they were given the direction to reduce 15% of their expense, just like any other economic development agencies in town. But given that their PP loan grant, their cattle shows, they're coming up with very innovative ways of getting more revenue, like they've been disinfecting the city facilities with the current equipment, and they've also done a lot of expense reduction. They're tracking positive to budget, and they're actually, the fourth column here is, well, how are they compared to last year? And they're $123,000 better than last year at this point of time. The highlight has been the cattle shows, obviously, in July. They were very successful in terms of revenue for the town and also for the Swiftel Center, capturing about $310,000 of revenue when a typical July for the center is about $70,000 of revenue. That said, year to date, the Swiftel Center has experienced a material loss of revenue, about 34% or $1.3 million. But they've also been able to hold their expense down or reduce their expense by 20%. And as of now, if all things being equal, the Swiftel Center will end on budget for the end of the year. That said, this comes with a price, and they've been implementing a lot of cost reduction initiatives which affect the full-time personnel. So now the Swiftel Center personnel are wearing many hats, and they're so that they can execute on the current event that they have. And I would really like to take the opportunity right now to give them a big thank you note, because even despite being reduced in staff, they are successfully, and we've been getting all these thank you notes from all the events that they've hosted. They keep doing an excellent job with a lot fewer full-time staff there. Also important to note that they have reduced their time, their weeks. They'll be closed for 1 week in November and 2 weeks of December, furloughing some of the full staff as well. And that's just to be able to meet our budget this year. In addition, we're reevaluating our 2021 budget because we don't know what first Q is going to look like. So we're evaluating that and make sure we track our expenses as well. Any questions on the Swiftel Center? All right. So that said, well, how does the economy, how was the economy in the third quarter, and how is it looking going forward? So according to First Midwest Wealth Management, after a really steep decline of about 32% on the second quarter, the third quarter was increased dramatically, 25%, and this is domestic for the entire U.S. And again, you see 25% recovery from the previous quarter, but it comes from a very low base. So even though it's good, it's still not. It's still at an overall deficit. In the third quarter, the recovery is expected to be 5% in the fourth quarter. Now, the Midwest Economy Index, which it estimates quarterly growth at a monthly frequency, was 4.3% in September positive and 1.55% in August. And so this is just a positive trend that the economy is growing in the Midwest. Looking further ahead, the conference board shows 3 scenarios how we're going to end up for the remainder of the year, and then how does 2021 look like. So we have the upside, the base, and the downside. And these are all based on main assumptions. So the upside it's saying that the 2020 will contract at a 2.9%, but then the 2021 will be at full recovery as of January with a 7.1 growth, annual growth at the end of 2021. The base scenario shows a contraction of minus 3.5% for the full year. Fourth quarter is expected to have a 1.5% growth, and then the 2021 is supposed to have around 3.4% growth. The main assumptions here is that the growth that we have experienced stalls a little bit due to high levels of unemployment and just elevated savings rates for the people, and they're not spending, basically. The downside, it's estimating to close the year at minus 6%, and then next year the recovery will be a recovery, but it will still be a recession of minus 2.6%. The assumptions here, it's a large resurgence in COVID-19 cases. No additional government stimulus until Q1 2021, delays in the coronavirus vaccine, and a contested U.S. presidential election that affects our consumer and business confidence. So those are the scenarios, and we're trying to factor in, well, what are we going to do with this? So our next slide shows, well, the city, given this macro and our local economic factors, the city provides some guidance of how we're going to end up at the end of the year. For the first and second penny, we remain at an 8% contraction. We want to be conservative, and we will continue managing our expenses to that. Our 3B tourism tax, we had previously estimated a 40% contraction. It's been rebounding, so we're changing our guidance to a 25% contraction to the remaining of the year. And our bid or hotel tax, previously forecasted a 60% contraction. Now we're at a 40% contraction for this year. After we factor this in and all the other revenues that the city is expected to receive, we believe that the general fund and the CIP funds will end up at a surplus of $683,000 and $1.5 million, respectively. All things being equal, all trends remaining the same. It is important to know that this surplus is mainly driven by a lot of initiatives and projects that were delayed. So we're hoping to be able to, because they're critical and they're still important, to carry forward to next year and funded by these surpluses. The 3B and the B funds are still expected to close at a deficit as of now of $52,000 and $48,000 respectively, and we may need to use reserves for that. There are enough reserves to cover for these deficits at this point. Any questions? All right, so next is the update on how are we doing with the Corona Relief Fund progress report. And so what this chart is showing, the total allocation of $5.5 million that the city of Brookings was granted from the federal government. We've currently submitted $2.3 million of submissions of expenses to be reimbursed. Given the restrictive nature of the process imposed by the state and only being able to reimburse expenses and not long-term solutions, we're estimating that we will only be able to recover $3.5 million, and that is including BMU and the hospital as well. We're collaborating with them to submit reimbursement for expenses. So as of now, we're going to be leaving $2 million on the table. Lastly, I'd like to give an update on the City Council priority project list. Of available balance is $4.8 million before the approved projects. The City Council approved projects that we have currently on record is the indoor rec, the food bank, the interchange, and the parks master plan. After these projects, we're at $2 million and $45,000. So after factoring that, we're at $2.7 million of available balance after the approved projects. 2 of these approved projects we've already taken action, the other 2 we've not. Then we factor in the primary projects, and after factoring the primary projects, we are at a 109 balance for the City Council priority project list. It is important to note that we have scheduled a study session, I believe, in second quarter for this to come back to City Council after we're able to close year and figure out how much we have available, and we can reevaluate these priorities as you see fit. And I believe this is the end of it. Any questions?
Council. I'd like to go back to the COVID relief fund.
Yes.
We were offered 5.5 million from the governor, correct?
If that's what was available to us.
Approximately,
Yes.
it's available. And so far, we've been able to retrieve 1.7,
Oh,
correct?
1.7 we have in
As
the
for
bank.
the-
We've
for-
submitted 2.3
Right.
for reimbursement.
So reimbursements that BMU and the hospital would get, for example, what would they be able to retrieve for?
It's sort of the same as personnel that has had to be dismissed from work due to COVID, so they get reimbursed by that. Some of the PPE as well.
Okay.
Some of the equipment for the hospital, I believe, was able to be reimbursed by that as well.
Are we being reimbursed for extra time that our health providers have had to put in, like OT that they would normally not be doing?
So the challenge with the hospital is that they're getting so much, they have a lot more access to other relief that we just want to make sure that we don't double dip. So
Right.
they're being very conscious of that. So they know what they can submit with us, and they're managing it, and we just pretty much help them submit the
Sure.
portion that they haven't submitted somewhere else.
Okay. And as far as for BMU, what would be some of the things that they would be reimbursed for? For example, I know that we were offered all this money and we're not able to get a lot of it. I mean, we're going to be lucky if we get a little over half of what was offered to us.
Yeah,
I know there's a lot of stipulations to most of this. It has to be COVID related somehow. I get that. But just for example, what are some of the things that BMU was able to get
So
reimbursed
it's the same.
for?
It's so restrictive that BMU, for the most part, and Ashley can correct me if I'm wrong, is like PPE and personnel expenses. Nothing else. And trust me, we've been extensively having meetings, and we push back, but
Right.
it's been very hard.
Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mayor Corbett.
Yes, go ahead.
My questions are actually also on the COVID relief fund. I'm just for public knowledge. I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit about what the city has been granted refunds for, and maybe even some of the projects that we've proposed that have been denied by the state for the allocations.
Sure. So mostly the main refund is we're getting reimbursed for all of our first responders' salaries from March to December. So that's the bulk of the refunds that we've gotten. This includes PD, E911, and I believe fire. Is that correct? Yes. And so that's the bulk of it. The other things that the city has been able to be reimbursed is all the PPE, staff time due to COVID, and so forth. But the main chunk is that, and some equipment, but not for all. For example, if only people that are 80% or more of their time are in front of a computer can get reimbursed for a laptop. Not everybody. The things that I comes to the top of my head that have not been able to be reimbursed, for example, the library is outside of their scope because they didn't consider the library to be an essential for our community. So anything from the library is not getting reimbursed. Any infrastructure projects, and we wanted to install touchless water fountains at the library, and they said we are not funding any infrastructure projects. We would rather fund water bottles than do that. And so the HVACs at the Swiftel Center, even though the Swiftel Center, it's an emergency plan hospital for the community, they would not fund any infrastructure projects for it as well. So basically the guideline and the most no is they claim that it has to be reasonable, but there's a very gray area on what reasonable is, and so they're being very vigilant about that. Now, we've had numerous meetings with them, and the reason why they say that they're being so strict is because they claim that the federal government is going to come back and audit everybody and their grandmother, and that they want to be in a good position. They don't want all the cities to have to return the funds once they've spent it. Other states are just giving away. They would have given us the $5.5 million and said, document it and make sure you're following the guidelines. They're kind of like helping us comply with all the guidelines, if you put it that way.
If I could, I would just add a couple of other things. So the public does know we did make request for a small business loan program, other incentives for non-for-profits, and all those times we've been denied. And so what we've tried to do is keep the money here local as much as possible. You know, I'm thankful for Eric and Ashley and their staff because they've been told so many times no, that they still go forward and ask for additional funds. One example is for technology upgrades for this facility in your meetings to go virtual. And that was denied as well to an extent. But at the end of the day, we are grateful that we are receiving $3.5 million, which will help us out in the future. It's just unfortunate that we are going to have to send $2 million back when we could utilize that throughout our community.
Yeah. Also important to note, they've always said no revenue replacement, so we cannot help offset, for example, if 3B and the B tax declines, it's a no-no.
Councilman Wendell?
I had a question on slide 3, which was the tax revenue report. I just wanted to confirm what you had noted, and for those that might look at these slides at home, the report for September activity is actually based on August activity. Is that accurate? So it's not necessarily a reflection of no home football games in September. We won't see that until the October report. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that is correct. They're a month behind. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Rangel? Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And Ashley, thank you.